we are joined now by the one and only Nick Bahe. Nick, how are you this morning?
Great. Kansas is in town playing Creighton. I mean, come on.
I gotta ask, man. Like, I know, like, are the emotions exploding out of your chest right now with Kansas and Nebraska, or Kansas and Creighton here?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know if it'll fully hit me until like the jump ball tips and Coach Self is on the sidelines and all those Kansas guys are on the floor. Just because it seems 15 years ago, it seemed insane. The idea of Kansas coming to Creighton seemed just absolutely insane. I remember when Danny Manning was an assistant coach at KU. I remember asking him, I'm like, hey, man, when I was at Creighton, I was like, hey, man, what's it going to take to get the Jayhawks to come to Creighton? And he gave me that. He hit me with this. He went, psh. he hit me with that one. He started beatboxing me like, come on, like the hell freezing over, like there's no way Kansas would come to Creighton. But here we are, 2024. Yeah, I'm excited. Obviously, my connection to both programs has made me really fired up for this one.
Nick, have you been able to present the Nick Bahe Trophy for this rivalry that's going to start brewing? I assume that when Creighton tries to storm that puppy later tonight, that you'll just present the winning trophy to whichever side.
Yeah, I need to think about what that would be. I don't know if it's just like a jar of salsa exploding onto a person, or I don't know. I'll have to figure out what that trophy needs to be. But yeah, listen, I'm all for making this an annual thing and just creating some silly trophy just to please me, because it's all about me, clearly, I guess.
Nick, we appreciate you indulging a little bit of our silliness here, but I am curious about Creighton as you kind of look at this one. Obviously, the players era tournament didn't necessarily go the way Creighton had hoped, although I thought they played pretty well against a good Texas A&M team, even though they didn't come out on top on that one. What is different about this team from maybe where you thought they'd be to start the season?
Oh, man. They're not shooting it as well as I thought. I mean, I think they were, when you always think of Creighton, you think of three-point shooting, but this team in particular has a lot of guys that if they're not making shots, it's somewhat of a problem. I mean, you look at I was looking at the Isaac Trout, Mason Miller, and Jackson McAndrew. Those three guys.
Mm-hmm.
80 of their 106 shots are threes. That's 83% of those three guys' field goal attempts are threes. Like, so it's pretty clear what they're doing right now and what their strengths are, and that's shooting a three. And all of them have had moments outside of Mason Miller, who I think is just in a little bit of a slump, but he can shoot the ball. But it's just when you are a team that is built from the 3-point line and you're not shooting it great, there's gonna be a domino effect in that. This team's Jamiya Neal is still finding himself. Pop Isaacs is still finding himself, but there's not a Baylor, Shireman, Trey Alexander guys that could just at will go get in the lane and go get their own. It allows for the teams to collapse a little bit more and send more guys at Kalkbrenner. So I guess, I had my concern. This was far from a perfect team heading into the year. No team really is. I had my concerns about the backcourt to a certain extent heading into the season. Just felt like a little shorthanded there. But the most surprising thing to me is just how Creighton has shot the three. They're shooting 31%. That's 241st in the country right now. That's been the most surprising thing, just because that's how this roster is kind of built.
Yeah, Nick, you mentioned the shooting struggles, and then you also brought up, I'm glad you brought up the lack of a Trey Alexander or a Baylor Shireman, right? Creighton's kind of in this weird spot where you don't have the guys to get into the lane to kind of relieve some of that pressure off the shooting, and then you're also not shooting the ball well. What is the solution there offensively for Creighton because I'm not sure they've got that guy on the roster that can just go get themselves and create a shot the way a Baylor or a Trey could. So it kind of feels like the only option is to start shooting better. Is there another option in your mind?
Yeah, I hate to be. I know some people get annoyed when coaches. It's almost like a joke for people. They're like, a coach is like, we got to make shots. It's like, well, duh. But everybody can say that. But I do think in this situation, the number one thing that needs to improve, or the remedy for the situation, is they do have to shoot it better. That you have to establish that. Sometimes you do have to state the obvious. I do think also this group, I think this group's good in transition. Like I think Jamiya Neal in particular is electric. I mean, when he is flying down the floor and gets and running the wing, and he gets an advanced pass from Ashworth, he is really tough to stop going to the rim. I think transition is a good place for this group to find themselves a little bit. I do, it's hard because Pop Isaacs and Neal can get into the lane. It's just then what happens when they're there. Pop Isaacs is just a little bit smaller, so it's maybe a little bit harder for him as it was for a guy like Trey Alexander or Baylor Shireman to make a play. I will say Pop Isaacs has better passing instincts than I anticipated him to have. Like at times he'll make like a really good feel play in the paint, seeing the weak side help and maybe kicking it opposite or dropping it down to Fred King or Kalkbrenner. So I do think there's potential there for Neal and Pop Isaacs to continue to get in the lane and make things happen. I think the other thing too, Ravi, and I'm sure you're gonna ask me about Kalkbrenner. They need to. I almost think the first couple of games they got lulled into a false sense of security of like Kalkbrenner's not Edey. Like he's not built to just throw the ball into the post and he just plays with his back to the basket. He doesn't necessarily have a bag of moves where he can go to. Like where Kalkbrenner's elite at is scoring off the move, off the catch, off a diagonal screen, off a pick and roll, running the floor. They need to figure out different ways to get him on the move to catch and finish, because I think that's still where he's at his best. I think the UTRGVs of the world that just played dead behind him, didn't send a double, allowed Kalk to get deep post position, maybe lulled them into a false sense of security of just like, oh, you could just treat this guy like he's Edey or whoever and just throw it into him. I'm certainly not saying to not throw it into him. I'm just saying that while he's a really good scorer and his numbers indicate that, he's a little bit different kind of a post scorer than I think maybe some people conjured up in their head when they've watched him score 49 points, if you will.
Working on the note of Kalkbrenner, between him and Ashworth, of course, everyone kind of leaned on those two guys to propel Creighton if they were going to have the season success that they've had the past few years. Which of those two need to play above their maybe potential or average tonight if they're fully healthy to be able to pull off an upset?
Well, this is maybe a little bit of maybe some of this is your answer is relative to what you expect their baseline to be. Mm-hmm. Like if Kalkbrenner plays, I expect him to play at an elite level. So I would probably, there's no question that Kalkbrenner's the MVP of the team and the guy that really elevates them. But I would say Ashworth. I think without Stephen Ashworth's ball handling, because Kansas is going to dial up some pressure, it'll be interesting to see what Coach Self does in terms of putting DeJuan Harris on him or whoever. And I mean, DeJuan Harris was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year 2 years ago. He's not good. He's great on the ball. So he's going to have to handle the ball. He's going to have to make shots. We talked about how they need those 3-point shooting numbers to increase. So I would say that Ashworth is the guy that probably needs to play at a little bit of a above level, if you will, tonight, given the matchup.
Nick, I'm curious who you've been most surprised by in terms of outperforming what you thought they'd be coming into the season. We mentioned Jamiya Neal earlier. Yeah. I also want to ask about Ty Davis, because I'm not sure. I certainly, at least, didn't expect him to be this much of a factor early.
Yeah, I don't know if the coaching staff really had a good sense of what things would look like. Sometimes with freshmen, sometimes they hit a wall early, and sometimes they make these leaps in like a week or 2 weeks, and you're like, whoa, okay, this guy went from we can't play this guy in a real game to like, oh, this guy can hang in there. I think Ty Davis has done a good job of staying within himself and playing hard, which I think is sometimes really challenging for young players to do, because they think, well, I've been the man my whole life. This is another basketball game. I'm just going to come in here and foot on the gas and attack, and that's not necessarily the situation. I I know this sounds weird because he was highly touted, but I think Jackson McAndrew has been better than I thought he was even going to be. Seeing him, he's one of those guys that I'm talking about that has made these really big leaps. I was worried with him that just from a physicality standpoint, he just wasn't going to be able to hang in there at this level right now. But he's done a better job of fighting. I mean, he's sure that there was a play against Texas A&M where he went to block out Washington, and Washington literally sent him 5 feet flying. So he's always still somewhat swimming in it. But I really like Jackson McAndrew, guys. I think he's going to be a really, really good player. I think he's more. I illustrated those 3-point shooting numbers, but I also think he's more than that. Like I do think he's got some ability to put the ball in the deck a few times or score in different ways. I just love his confidence. That guy, I saw it in that Purdue exhibition game where it was like this guy stepped on the floor against a team that played the national championship game a year ago and was totally cool and calm and confident. So even though Jackson McAndrew had a lot of he was highly touted coming in, I think he's been a little bit better than I maybe anticipated him to be.
That's Nick Bahe. He's a college basketball analyst and, of course, host of the Nick Bahe Podcast. And can't forget about Schick and Nick as well. Nick, we appreciate you joining us. Hopefully we can catch up again soon and find you in a place where you're not so conflicted, where you're not a house torn upon itself. I hope you enjoy the game tonight, Nick.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.